Chapter 6 The Wild Wastelands of the North. About 9 o'clock the next morning, 3 lonely figures might have been seen picking their way across the Shribble by the shoals and stepping stones. It was a shallow, noisy stream, and even Jill was not wet above her knees when they reached the northern bank. About 50 yards ahead, the land rose up to the beginning of the moor, everywhere steeply, and often in cliffs. "I suppose that's our way," said Scrub, pointing left and west to a stream flowed down the moor through a shallow gorge. But the marsh wiggle shook his head. "The giants mainly live along that side of the gorge," it said. "You might say the gorge was like a street to them. We'd better straight ahead, even though it's a bit steep." They found a place where they could scramble up, and in about 10 minutes stood panting at the top. They cast a longing look back at the valley land of Narnia, and then turned their faces to the north. The vast, lonely moor stretched on and up as far as they could see. On their left was a rockier ground. Jill thought that must be the edge of the Giant's Gorge, and did not take much care about looking in that direction. They set out. It was a good springy ground for walking, and a day of pale winter sunlight. As they got deeper into the moor, the loneliness increased. One could hear peewits and see an occasional hawk. When they halted in the middle of the morning for a rest and a drink of a little hollow by stream, Jill was beginning to feel that she might enjoy adventures after all, and said so. "We haven't had any yet," said the marsh wiggle. Walks after the first halt, like school mornings after break or railway journeys after changing trains, never go on as they were before. When they set out again, Jill noticed that the rocky edge of the gorge had drawn nearer, and the rocks were less flat, more upright than they had been. In fact, they were like little towers of rock, and what funny shapes they were! "I do believe," thought Jill, "that all the stories about giants might have come from those funny rocks. If you were coming along here when it was half dark, you could easily think those piles of rocks were giants. Look at them now! You could almost imagine that lump on top was a head. It would be rather too big for a body, but I would do well enough for an ugly giant. And that bushy stuff, I suppose it's heather and birds' nests. Really, would you do quite well for a hair and a beard? And the things sticking out on each are quite like ears. They'd be horribly big, but I dare say giants would have big ears like elephants and... Oh!" Her blood froze. The thing moved. It was a real giant. There was no mistaking it. She had seen it turn its head. She had caught a glimpse of the great, stupid, puff-cheeked face. All the things were giants, not rocks. There were 40 or 50 of them, all in a row, obviously standing with their feet at the bottom of the gorge and their elbow resting on the edge of the gorge, just as men might stand leaning on a wall. Lazy men on a fine morning after breakfast. "Keep straight on," whispered Puddlegum, who had noticed them too. "Don't look at them, and whatever you do, don't run. They'll all be after us in a moment." So they kept on, pretending not to see the giants. It was like walking past the gate of a house where there's a fierce dog, only far worse. They didn't look angry or kind or interested at all. There was no sign that they had seen the travelers. Then, whiz, 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 some heavy object came hurtling through the air, and with a crash of a big boulder fell about 20 paces ahead of them. And then, thud! Another fell 20 feet behind. "Are they aiming at us?" asked Scrub. "No," said Puddlegum. "We'd be a good deal safer if they were. They're trying to hit that cairn over there at the right. They won't hit it, you know. It's safe enough. They're such very bad shots. They play cock-shies most fine mornings. About the only game they're clever enough to understand." It was a horrible time. There seemed to be no end to the lines of giants, and they never ceased hurling stones, some of which fell extremely close. Quite apart from the real danger, this very sight and sound of their faces and voices were enough to scare everyone. Jill tried not to look at them. After about 25 minutes, the giants apparently had a quarrel. This put an end to the cock-shies, but it was not pleasant to be within a mile of quarreling giants. They stormed and jeered at one another in long, meaningless words of about 20 syllables each. They foamed and gibbered and jumped in their rage, and each jump shook the earth like a bomb. They lamed each other on the head. They lamed each other on the head with great clumsy stone hammers, but their skulls were so hard that the hammers bounced off again, and then the monster who had given the blow would drop his hammer with a howl of pain because it had stung his fingers. But he was so stupid that he would do exactly the same thing a minute later. This was a good thing in the long run, for by the end of an hour all the giants were so hurt that they sat down and began to cry. When they sat down, their heads were below the edge of the gorge, so that you could see them no more. But Jill could hear them howling and blubbering and boo-hooing like great babies after the whole place was a mile behind. That night they bivouacked on the bare moor, and Puddleglum showed the children how to make the best of their blankets by sleeping back to back. The backs help keep each other warm so that you can have both blankets on top. But it was chilly even so, and the ground was hard and lumpy. The Marshwiggle told them they would feel more comfortable if they thought how much colder it would be later on further north. But this didn't cheer them at all. They traveled across Ettinsmoor for many days, saving the bacon and living chiefly on the moorfowl. They were not, of course, talking birds, which Eustace and the Wiggle shot. Jill rather envied Eustace for being able to shoot. He had learned it on his voyage with King Caspian, and there were countless streams on the moor. They were never short of water. Jill thought that when, in books, people live on what they shoot, it never tells you what a long, smelly, messy job it is plucking and cleaning dead birds, and how cold it makes your fingers. But the great thing was that they hardly met any giants. One giant saw them, but he only roared and laughed and stumped away in his own business. About the 10th day, they reached a place where the country changed. They came to the northern edge of the moor and looked down a long, steep slope into a different and grimmer land. Grimmer land. At the bottom of the slope were cliffs. Beyond these, a country of high mountains, dark precipices, stone valleys, ravines so deep and narrow that not one could see far into them, and rivers that poured out of echoing gorge to plunge suddenly into black depths. Needless to say, it was Puddleglum who pointed out a sprinkling of snow on the more distant slopes. But there'll be more on the north side of them, I shouldn't wonder, he added. It took them some time to reach the foot of the slope, and when they did, they looked down from the top of the cliffs at a river running below them from west to east. It was walled in by precipices on the far side as well as on their own, and it was green and sunless, full of rapids and waterfalls. The roar of it shook the earth even where they stood. The bright side of it is, said Puddleglum, that if we break our necks getting down the cliff, then we're safe from being drowned in the river. What about that? Said Scrub, suddenly pointing upstream into the left. Then they all looked and saw the last thing they were expecting. A bridge. And what a bridge, too! It was huge, a single arc that spanned the gorge from the cliff top to cliff top. And the crown of that arc was as high as the cliff tops as the dome of St. Paul's is above the street. Why, it must be a giant's bridge, said Jill. Or a sorcerer's, more likely, said Puddleglum. We've got to look out for enchantments in a place like this. I think it's a trap. I think it'd turn into mist and melt away just when we're out in the middle of it. Oh, for goodness sake, don't be such a wet blanket, said Scrub. Why on earth shouldn't it be a proper bridge? Do you think any of the giants we've seen would have the sense to build a thing like that? Said Puddleglum. But mightn't it have been built by other giants? Said Jill. I mean, by giants who lived hundreds of years ago and were far cleverer than the modern kind. It might have been built by the same ones who built the giant city we're looking for. And that would mean that we're on the right track, the old bridge leading to the old city. That's a real brainwave, Bull, said Scrub. It must be that. Come on. So they turned and went to the bridge, and when they reached it, it certainly seemed solid enough. The single stones were as big as those at Stonehenge, and must have been squared by good masons once, though now they were cracked and crumbled. The balustrade had apparently covered with rich carvings, of which some traces remained, mouldering faces and forms of giants, Minotaurs, squids, centipedes, and dreadful gods. Puddleglum still didn't trust it, but he consented to cross it with the children. The climb up to the crown of the ark was long and heavy. In many places the great stones had dropped out, leaving horrible gaps through which you could look down to the river foaming thousands of feet below. They saw an eagle fly through under their feet, and the higher they went, the colder it grew, and the wind blew so that they could hardly keep their footing. It seemed to shake the bridge. When they reached the top and could look down the furthest slope of the bridge, they saw what looked like the remains of an ancient giant road stretching away before them in the heart of the mountains. Many stones of the pavement were missing, and there were wide patches of grass between those that remained. And riding towards them on that ancient road were two people of normal, grown-up human size. "Keep on, move towards them," said Puddleglum. "Anyone you meet in a place like this is as likely as not to be an enemy. But we mustn't let them think we're afraid." By the time they stepped off the edge of the bridge onto the grass, the two strangers were quite close. One was a knight in complete armor with his visor down. His armor and his horse were black. There was no device on his shield and no banneret on his spear. The other was a lady on a white horse, a horse so lovely that you wanted to kiss its nose and give it a lump of sugar at once. But the lady who rode side saddle and wore a long fluttering dress of dazzling green was lovelier still. "Good day, travelers," she cried out in a voice as sweet as Let's try this one more time. "Good day, travelers," she cried out in a voice as sweet as the sweetest bird song, trilling her R's delightfully. "Some of yous are young pilgrims to walk this rough waste." "That's as may be, ma'am," said Puddleglum very stiffly and on his guard. "We're looking for the ruined city of the giants," said Jill. "The ruined city?" said the lady. "That is a strange place to be seeking. What will you do if you find it?" "We've got to," began Jill, but Puddleglum interrupted. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but we don't know you or your friend. A silent chap, isn't he? And you don't know us, and we'd as soon not talk to strangers about our business if you don't mind. Shall we have a little rain soon, do you think?" The lady laughed, the richest, most musical laugh you could imagine. "Well, children," she said, "you have a wise, solemn old guide with you. I think none the worse of him for keeping his own counsel, but I'll be free with mine. I've often heard the name of the giantess city Ruinous, but never met anyone who would tell me the way thither. This road leads to the burg and to the castle of Hafang, where dwell the gentle giants. They are as mild, civil, prudent, and courteous as those of Ettismore are foolish, fierce, savage, and given to all beastliness. And in Harfang you may or may not hear tidings of the city Ruinous, but certainly you shall find good lodgings and merry hosts. You would be wiser to winter there, or at the least to tarry certain days for your ease and refreshments. There you shall have steaming baths, soft beds, and bright hearts, and the roast will be baked, and the sweet will be strong on the table 4 times in a day." "I say," exclaimed Scrub, "that's something alike. Think of sleeping in a bed again." "Yes, and having a hot bath," said Jill. "Do you think they'll let us stay? We don't know them, you see." "Only tell them," answered the lady, "that she of the green kirtles salutes them by you, and has sent them 2 fair southern children for the autumn feast." "Oh, thank you ever so much," said Jill and Scrub. "But have care," said the lady, "on whatever day you reach Harfang, that you will not come to the door too late. For they shut the gates a few hours after noon, and it is custom of the castle that they will open it to none once they have drawn bolt, how hard soever he knock." The children thanked her again with shining eyes, and the lady waved to them. The Marshwiggle took his steeple half and bowed very stiffly. Then the silent knight and the lady started walking their horses up the slope of the bridge with such a great clatter of hoofs. Well, said Puddleglum, I'll give a good deal to know exactly where she's coming from, exactly where she's going. Not the sort you expect to meet in the wilds of Giantland, is she? Up to no good, I'll be bound. Oh, rot, said Scrub, I thought she was simply super. And think of hot meals and warm rooms. I do hope Harfang isn't a long way off. Same here, said Jill. And hadn't she a scrumptious dress? And the horse? All the same, said Puddleglum, I wish we knew a little more about her. I was going to ask her all about herself, said Jill. But how could I when you wouldn't tell her anything about us? Yes, said Scrub, and why were you so stiff and unpleasant? Ah, this is Scrub. Yes, said Scrub, and why were you so stiff and unpleasant? Didn't you like them? Them? Said the Wiggle. Who's them? I only saw one. Didn't you see the knight? Jill asked. I saw a suit of armor. I saw a suit of armor, said Puddleglum. Why didn't he speak? I expect he was shy, said Jill. Or perhaps he just wants to look at her and listen to her lovely voice. I'm sure I would if I was him. I was wondering, remarked Puddleglum, what you'd really see if you lifted up the visor of the helmet and looked inside. Hang it all, said Scrub. Think of the shape of the armor. What could be inside it except a man? How about a skeleton? Asked the Marsh Wiggle with ghastly cheeriness. Or perhaps, it added as an afterthought, nothing at all. I mean, nothing you could see. Something invisible? Really, Puddleglum, said Jill with a shudder. You have the most horrible ideas. How do you think of them all? Oh, bother his ideas, said Scrub. He's always expecting the worst, and he's always wrong. Let's think of those gentle giants and get on to Halfang as quickly as we can. I wish I knew how far it is. And now they nearly had the first of those quarrels which Puddleglum had foretold. Not that Jill and Scrub hadn't been sparring and snapping at each other a good deal before, but this was the first really serious disagreement. Puddleglum didn't want them to go to Harfang at all. He said that he didn't know what a giant's idea of being gentle might be. And anyway, Aslan's signs had nothing about staying with giants, gentle or otherwise. The children, on the other hand, who were sick of wind and rain and skinny fowl roasting over campfires and hard, cold earth to sleep on, were absolutely dead set to visit the gentle giants. In the end, Puddleglum agreed to do so, but only on one condition. The others must give an absolute promise that unless he gave them leave, they would not tell the giants they came from Narnia, or that they were looking for Prince Rilian. And they gave him this promise and went on. After that talk with the lady, things got worse in two different ways. In the first place, the country was much harder. The road led through the endless narrow valleys down a cruel path of wind that was always blowing in their faces. There was nothing that could be used for firewood, and there was no nice little hollows to camp in, as there had been on the Bourne. And the ground was all stony and made your feet sore by night, and every bit of you sore by day and night. In the second place, whenever the lady had intended on telling them about Harfang, the actual effect on the children was a bad one. They could think about nothing but beds and baths and hot meals and how lovely it would be to be indoors. They never talked about Aslan or even about the lost prince now, and Jill gave up her habit of repeating the signs over to herself every night and morning. She said to herself at first that she was too tired, but she soon forgot all about it. And though you might have expected that the idea of having a good time at Harfang would have made them more cheerful, it really made them more sorry for themselves, more grumpy and snappy with each other, with Puddleglum. At last they came one afternoon to a place where the gorge in which they were traveling widened out. Let's start that paragraph one more time. At last they came one afternoon to a place where the gorge in which they were traveling widened out and dark fir woods rose on either side. They looked ahead and saw that they had come to the mountains. Before them lay a desolate rocky plain, beyond it further mountains capped with snow, but between them and those further mountains rose a low hill with an irregular, flattish top. "Look! Look!" cried Jill, and pointed across the plain, and there, through the gathering dusk from beyond the flat hill, everyone saw lights. Lights! Not moonlight, not fires, but a homely, cheery row of lighted windows. If you have never been in the wilderness day and night for weeks, you would hardly understand how they felt. "Harfang!" cried Scrub and Jill in glad, excited voices. And "Harfang," repeated Puddleglum in a dull, gloomy voice. But he added, "Hello, wild geese." And he had the bow off his shoulder in a second. He brought down a good fat goose. It was far too late to think of reaching Harfang that day, but they had a hot meal and a fire, and they started the night warmer than they had for a week. And after the fire had got down, the night grew bitterly cold, and when they woke the next morning, their blankets were stiff with frost. "Never mind," said Jill, stamping her feet. "Hot baths tonight."